Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another field ecology class. This class is going to be indoors for the most part. This is a session focused on herbalism. And before we get into an outline for today's work, let me go through our sightings from last week with you, so that we can keep up with those and you can keep up with your journal. So last week we were at Walton Woods, and our focus was on aquatic studies. And if I remember correctly, it was a cold day, but I think we did okay generally. And here's what I have from last week in terms of those sightings. And I'm beginning with number 75 for you. I have the following. We saw turkey vulture, and I guess that was the first time we've seen them in the field. Large bird, scavenger, wingspan almost 6 feet very often, with the wings up in a V, and Bay was able to get a couple of nice shots at them as they were overhead. So turkey vulture, number 75. Number 76 is hop hornbeam. If you remember, a member of the birch family, and the one that has a rather shreddy looking bark, hop hornbeam. 77, I've listed shagbark hickory. We did see the hickory on another one of our hikes, but as I went over my list, it seemed as though we failed to record it. So let's record it here. Shagbark hickory, and that's in the walnut family, if you remember, Juglandaceae. 78, we had a shrub that was leafing out, one of our early individuals to leaf out, the Tartarian honeysuckle. One of our madcap horses, which was the acronym, if you remember, for those woody plants, shrubs and trees that are oppositely branched. Madcap horse, maple, ash, dogwood, caprifoliaceae, horse chestnut, if you've forgotten. Number 79, I have dogbane, and that would be the spreading dogbane, with the very interesting seed pods that we saw. Number 80, now we're getting into some of the life in the water when we were working through our biotic index with you. I had bluegill, member of the sunfish family. I had zebra mussel, sow bug, S-O-W, bug, scud, S-C-U-D, looks like a little shrimp. And the last one I had was a damselfly nymph, which you would find under common bluet, B-L-U-E-T, which is one of the common damselflies of that area. So that takes us to number 84, so that should catch you up with your list thus far. Okay, good. Okay, everyone, I think that we could start by actually taking a quick look, an overview of what I'd like to share with you today. So on the board here, I've written an outline for us. So what I'm going to do with our herbalism work today is to initially take you through an introduction. As part of the introduction, I'd like to share with you a personal overview, followed by a series of definitions. We'll look at the concept of herb and medical herbalism and a notion called synergy. Then I'd like to share some facts and figures with you relative to herbalism, and a little discussion on nutrition as well, which is an important aspect of keeping ourselves healthy. We never do anything regarding medical herbalism without delving into nutrition, at least to some extent. And then finally, I'll finish up with what we call the traveling medicine show. And I brought that with me with some samples, some remedies that I'd like to share with you. And as part of this work, we'll go through what I would call a systems integration to give us a sense for what parts of our bodies take in these herbs. And then we'll look at herbs and various types of preparations. And then I'll finish up with giving you some nice resources you could focus upon. Okay, good. Okay, everyone. With a nice dandelion in the background, I thought I would begin with a little introduction for you. When it comes to herbalism, so many people think that using herbs is simply something of the past, and it is not necessarily relevant today. And I hope that upon completion of this session, you'll think differently upon that notion. For herbs and herbal healing and the chemistry of plants is a very important aspect to our well-being today, whether you realize it or not. For myself, my journey into herbalism began many, many decades ago. And as is the case with many people, for me it was not only a matter of interest to explore plants and their uses, but it came down to my reality. For I had medical issues which at that point in my life moved me to look at alternative healing modalities, and herbalism was the one I chose. For me, I had a very, very serious eczema, which is a very harsh skin condition. The skin is raw and red and peeling, and it hurts, it itches. It seems to be something that's passed along within families. It's something we inherit. It's something that often is triggered by stress, or it is triggered often by foods. And so for me, during the worst times of it, I was seeing allergists, and I was seeing dermatologists, and everything came down to treating my eczema symptomatically. And that means I was taking cortisone very often, both internally and externally, a very harsh drug. And that would take care of things for a day or two, and then it would come right back. And that was the treatment. And after a while of dealing with that, I just came to the realization that it didn't make much sense to try to live my life treating symptoms that continually returned. And so at that point in my life, I had already been exploring the realm of herbalism, and it seemed logical for me to further pursue that realm. And so for me, I connected with a local herbalist, nutritionalist, and working with her, we gradually changed certain aspects of my lifestyle, my food, and the herbs I was taking, the supplements I was taking, and this made a difference. This made a very important difference. So for something I had been dealing with for a very long time, after a couple of months of changing my diet and working through various cleanses of the system, and then working with herbs and other supplements to support the system, I started seeing some changes. And after a couple of months, when I started seeing those changes, of course, it only made sense to continue the processes. And after 6 months, it was even better. And after about 9 months, I felt human again. And that was a big change. So for me, as is the case with many, it is an imbalance, it is an illness, it is an ailment that we have that moves us to exploring new areas for healing. And once my body went through those processes, I guess I never turned back. And herbalism has been a very important aspect of my life ever since. So for me, the notion of healing has been a process of working with nutrition and working with herbalism and understanding the chemistry of plants as we do today, which gives me further insight into understanding why the plants work as they do. So in the early days of my explorations with herbs, much of the information we had at that time was historical. You would go to various resources and they would have list after list after list of things the plants could do for us. And it was on that level that you had to explore. But once we moved through the 1970s and beyond, more research was undertaken, and we started learning more and more about the components of plants and the chemistry of plants. So, through the decades, we've grown to appreciate much more in terms of why the plants work as they do. And that's been very exciting, to be a part of that process and those understandings. So that takes me to a place of just sharing with you this notion, and this is very important. We have various options relative to healing. And with today's session, I simply want you to be aware of this option. So for me, it's always been a matter of my focus on natural or holistic healing. That's always been my focus. But I also can appreciate what Western medicine, allopathic medicine, has to share as well. For me personally, I believe Western medicine shines in the emergency room. When we're dealing with acute situations, I believe that there's no better place to be than an emergency room in a hospital. So it's all about finding a balance. So I don't negate anything, and I incorporate what I think makes sense to me. So, and that's the way it works and should work with each individual. So how much holistic you are or how much allopathic you are, it's all perfectly fine, but be aware of the options. And that's what this session is all about. All right. So folks, after a brief introduction, you have a sense for what moved me into this field of herbalism. And truly when I say to you I've never looked back, I really haven't. Because once you work with herbs on that level, and once you depend upon herbs in that way, it's like you make a friend for the rest of your life. And you never forget your friends, and you always appreciate your friends. And so it stays with you. Okay, so with that in mind, let me now share a couple of definitions with you. Herbs, this is a good place to start. And although you'll see many different definitions for herbs, this is the one I'll use. An herb is a plant or any part of a plant that is in any way beneficial to us. It's probably the broadest definition you'll ever hear, but it's the one I choose to use. And when I say that the herb is in some way beneficial to us, as you might suspect, that means the plant could be a food, could be a medicine, could be a seasoning, a perfume. It could be a tool, it could be a cleanser, it could be anything you could imagine using plants for. And so when you think about it with that kind of definition, every plant is an herb. And I truly believe that that's the case. And every plant that is known and is well used, obviously that sort of information gets passed along. And the ones that we don't use, that's just a mystery waiting for us to figure out. Because all plants contain their own unique chemistry. And as we've discovered over time, their chemistry affects our chemistry. And please keep in mind, as a result, that many times herbs are gentle in their workings, moderate in their workings, or some are real tough stuff. And it's the tough stuff ones that you really have to be careful with, as you must be careful with all herbs, because the herbs are drugs, and they are chemicals, and this is not something to be played with. So, take this experience today as an educational process, and don't play with herbs. Be cautious, be responsible. We can do this without a problem educationally, but just understand that if you were to come to me with a problem and I was to share with you the herbal remedy, that would be fine. But if I was to share with you the remedy and give it to you as well for use, that would actually be illegal, because that would mean I'd be practicing medicine without a license. So just realize there are parameters in which we can work with herbs. And here in New York, there's no such thing as a practicing herbalist. It is completely against the law. So I couldn't hang an herbalist sign above my cabin door and welcome you to come in and partake. And so just realize that one has to be careful when one is dealing with these kinds of healing modalities. Okay, so by definition, an herb is a useful plant. Fine. How about medical herbalism? Here's what I would share with you. And this is very important. When we deal with the notion of medical herbalism, we're working with the following. Number one, we're working with the whole plant. Now that is to say, we're working with the entire plant, everything above the ground or below. We're working with each of the plant organs in its entirety as well, which means root, stem, leaf, and reproductive structures. So you're using the whole part of the plant or the whole plant. That's very important. Secondly, you're treating the whole person. You are not simply looking at the illness and the symptom. You are looking at the person as a whole, and you're looking to remedy imbalances in that person or deficiencies in that person. So these are two mechanisms that separate us really from allopathic or Western medicine. For instead of dealing with the whole, allopathic medicine deals with components which are isolated and concentrated and created into a precise dosage, as well as instead of working with the whole person and every aspect of that person, you are simply looking at the disease or the symptoms very often, and you're treating those. And As a result, there is a third factor which separates the two, and that is with herbalism, rarely, and it does happen, of course, but rarely are there side effects with holistic remedies. In allopathic or Western medicine, every drug on the market has its side effects. And I have books at home which list every drug and their side effects, the moderate ones and the serious ones. So that's another big difference between the two. So really, you're looking at a holistic approach, the whole of the herb treating the whole of the person, rarely with side effects, as opposed to treating isolated components, concentrated into precise dosage, or wholly synthetic remedies based upon the natural components, treating the disease and or symptoms as opposed to treating the whole person, and always showing side effects. So these are two very basic definitions I want you to be aware of. Herbalism, herbs and medical herbalism. And actually the third definition I would want you to be aware of would be synergy. This is very important, and it relates to something I've just shared with you. And that is to say that the whole is greater than any individual part. And I can give you some examples, because holistic remedies work synergistically. So if you were to take, for instance, plants high in vitamin C, plants like rose hips and watercress, plants like parsley, these plants also are high in iron. And iron is better assimilated in the body in the presence of vitamin C. And likewise, plants high in vitamin C also contain bioflavonoids, yellow-colored chemicals, which help in the absorption of vitamin C. So on one level, this is a synergistic process where different components add to the overall effect. Another example I could give you would be certain drugs on the market. One of them is called ephedrine, and it comes from the mahuang plant from China. It's also called ephedra, which is the genus name. And the ephedra plant in Chinese medicine, that dates back more than 5,000 years in terms of its documentation, has been used throughout this time for respiratory problems. And it has a very, very long history for ailments like asthma and bronchitis and any sort of problems dealing with the respiratory system. And it's been used historically with great success through this period of time. So what happens is, now modern medicine gets a hold of this traditional herb and extracts from it a compound which was called ephedrine, a drug that was called ephedrine. And again, you have an isolated compound being derived from the plant, and it is it serves to create the drug ephedrine, which is then marketed and makes its way to the market. But there's a problem when people start taking it, because it does help the lungs, but the side effect is that it causes a significant rise in blood pressure. And so doctors were prescribing it quite a lot. It was supposed to be one of those wonder drugs that came out a number of decades ago. But then when they saw this rise of blood pressure, they started easing off on it because of the dangers involved. And we've come to discover that there are alkaloids in the plant, which are these nitrogen-based compounds, very strong, that will actually cause a rise in blood pressure, but there are other alkaloids that drop blood pressure, reduce it. And when you take the whole plant, they cancel each other out, and you don't have that side effect. You know, another drug that made its way to the market comes from an Indian plant, and the Ayurvedic system of India also dates back more than 5,000 years in terms of its documentation. And this is from the Rowolfia plant. And from this plant, we have the drug Reserpine. And traditionally, this was an herb that was used to simply calm the body and treat insomnia. And again, for literally thousands of years, people have been using it for that purpose. When it comes onto the market, developed as a drug, people were taking it to reduce blood pressure, which it does. But again, the side effect was heightened depression, significantly so. And once again, you have that same synergistic process underway, where you have compounds balancing out these potential side effects. And taken as an herb, it's a wonderful calming agent. But as a drug, Reserpine, it had these very pronounced side effects. So these are just a few examples of synergy, the importance of using the wholeness of the plant and the constituents thereof to balance and enhance the overall effect. That's what synergy is about. And again, it's one of the very important contrasting agents between holistic herbalism and Western allopathic medicine.